Hello, hello, hello. Magandang hapon, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Para sa ating mga kapatid dyan sa Luzon, mayapag at panapo na imbaga malem, masantos yangarem, marahay na hapon. At sa mga kapatid natin from the Visayas, maayong hapon, maupay nga kulop, maayong ugto, and from Mindanao, Assalamualaikum, buenas tardes. Anong masasabi mo sa aking co-host ngayon? Magandang hapon sa iyo, Paul.
Ayan po, magandang hapon po at para sa ating mga panohing banyaka, good afternoon, annyeonghaseyo, konnichiwa, salamat siya, siyang Welcome po sa ating mga regular na kapakinig at tagapanood sa Zoom at sa ating Facebook Live. Hello po sa inyong lahat.
Hello! Magandang hapon ulit. Mabuhay tayong lahat. At syempre, magandang hapon sa aking yang co-host uli, no, Paul? And welcome sa ating ika-33 or 33rd episode ng the Filipino Sustainable Development Goals Action Hour or the SDG Action Hour. Ito po yung ating lingguhang kamustahan para sa maganda, maayos, mabuti at makabuluhang kinabukasan. Isang oras na naman ng hitik na talakayan ng mga usaping pang napapanahon, di ba, Paul?
Yes po at salamat din po sa ating ever-glowing, always a ray of sunshine, Ma'am Dada. Sa hapon pong ito, we are honored to have with us a very special guest para i-discuss ang another exciting and interesting topic na pinamagatang Cultural Heritage and Future Earth Philippines.
Wow, very interesting talaga ang topic na yan, Paul, ano? Because if you talk about cultural heritage, parang ito yung nagdudugtong ng past natin sa ating kasalukuyan at pwede natin maging pamantayan para sa ating kinabukasan.
Yes po, actually, Ma'am Dada, tama po yan. And for this afternoon, mapakikinggan po natin ang cultural heritage ng Pilipinas at ang kaugnayan nito sa ating mundo. Ay, Ma'am Dada, maalala ko lang po bago tayo magpatuloy. Ilang reminders lang po para sa ating mga kasama na nanonood.
Yes.
Para po sa email notifications po natin, ina-advise po namin ang mga attendees to delete previous notices about SDG Action Hour dahil weekly po tayo nagpapadala ng bagong message. So parang hindi po yung inbox natin. So to keep updated naman po sa events, activities, announcements, we invite you to like our official Facebook page na Future Earth Philippines. And speaking of past na babalikan, kung gusto po ninyo mapanood ulit ng ating previous episodes, you can subscribe to our official YouTube channel. Mayroon po tayong 52 episodes na pwede ninyong balikan. So yung link po sa chat box na lang. Ma'am Dada.
Ayan. Yes. Nako, thank you sa reminder na yan, ano, para naman hindi na rin nalilito yung ating mga regular viewers and ating nakakasama dito sa ating 1 hour na SDG Action Hour talaga. Exciting ang topic na to, no? This afternoon, kaya wag na natin patagalin. I-introduce na natin ang ating distinguished at kagalang-galang na panauhin para sa hapon na to. Ang atin pong kapitapitagang panauhin sa hapong ito is the immediate past Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology or the DOST. He is a decorated government official. Nako, hindi naman sa marami siyang dekorasyon sa katawan, ano? Pero marami ng awards talagang na-receive ang ating special guest for this afternoon. Aside from being the former Secretary of the DOST, he is also a former UP System Vice President and former Chair of the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development. Our distinguished guest is also a recipient of the Dangal ng Bayan Civil Service Commission Award and Dangal ng Lipi ng Bulacan Award.
Ayan po, hindi pa po natatapos dyan. And after serving as Secretary ng DOST, ay nakikita pa rin po ang presensya niya sa field ng science and technology. Actually, he held various positions sa iba't ibang institusyon, gaya ng pagiging chair ng Automated Technology Corp, ng Entrepreneur Volunteers Foundation Incorporated and Kabesera Incorporated o ang Heritage Association of Bulacan, Bulacan. Aside po dito ay member din po siya ng Board of Directors ng MyNILAD and AMH Corp at Board of Trustees ng Dela University. And from there, ay consultant din po siya ng DOST Science Education Institute at ng Rizal Technological University. Meron pa po, President of the Philippine Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology and President Emeritus ng Philippine Institute of Chemical Engineers.
Nako, wow. Ano pa ba ang sasabihin natin? Grabe na. Pero alam niyo po ba, mga kapatid, at dahil po sa passion ng ating panauhin sa larangan ng science and technology, siya po yung brains behind the Science for the People book series. And Dr. Dela Peña, I'm proud to say that I was the research associate of Dr. Romero for the Science for Communities. Nako, kaya po namimigay kami ng libro na yan para naman po maraming makabasa. So ladies and gentlemen, mga kapatid, mga kapamilya, mga kapuso, please welcome our distinguished guests for this afternoon, Dr. Fortunato Dela Peña.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I am pleased and honored to be featured speaker in this program, the SDG Hour. And I would like to greet, of course, our national scientist, Lourdes Cruz, who is behind all of these Future Earth Philippines activities together with former NAST President Rodora Asanza. When I was asked by national scientist Lourdes Cruz on what topic I will speak about, I thought of sharing with you some experience that I have gained when I assumed the chairmanship of Kabesera Incorporated. Kabesera Incorporated is the heritage society of my hometown, Bulacan, Bulacan, and probably most of you know that that particular town is expected to undergo, shall we say, significant transformation because of the establishment of the new international airport. So our Heritage Society is organized and is trying our best to see how we can preserve as much as possible the culture and the heritage that we have in that particular town. Maybe some of you are familiar with the Del Pilar heroes. Okay, so Marcelo Del Pilar comes from our town. Gregorio Del Pilar comes from our town. A lesser known personality is Padre Mariano Sibilia, who was one of the advocates of secularization and who was deported to Marianas. If he was not deported, he could have been one of those who will be executed like Gomez Gombursa. Now, the topic I chose is cultural heritage and future Earth Philippines because I know that future Earth Philippines is very much involved about science and technology, but cultural heritage is, I think, part of future Earth Philippines. And so I decided to make a presentation on this. First part is a presentation on the legal basis, okay, of having activities in the conservation of cultural heritage. And the second part will be to show some examples. Actually, there are many fields or areas, okay, when we talk of building a database for our cultural heritage. Okay, so we have the what we call the significant intangible cultural heritage. We have the significant tangible immovable heritage. We have the significant tangible movable heritage. We have the natural resources, significant natural resources. And I decided that after presenting the legal basis or the explanation for this cultural heritage thing, I will follow it up with a presentation of examples of natural resources, okay, significant natural resources, because this is easily relatable to our future Earth Philippines. But towards the end, maybe without photographs anymore, I can cite examples of the other types of cultural heritage properties. So allow me to proceed now. So we will share with you screen sharing. So here it is, cultural heritage and future Earth Philippines. I actually was assisted by a townmate who is also a member of our Heritage Society, Narwin Gonzalez, who is from the Department of History of UP Diliman, and of course, he is the resident historian of our Heritage Society. Next slide, please. This now is the legal basis. Enshrined in the 1987 Philippine Constitution is the commitment of the state to promote, enrich, and conserve the country's artistic and historic wealth that constitute the cultural treasure of the nation. Next slide, please. The 1987 Philippine Constitution, under Article 14 on Arts and Culture, declared that the state shall foster the preservation, enrichment, and dynamic evolution of a Filipino national culture based on the principle of unity in diversity in a climate of free artistic and intellectual expression. Next slide, please. Thus, in the year 2009, the Philippine Congress passed into law Republic Act number 10066, also known as the National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009, which underscores a vision for cultural heritage, aptly stated as follows. 1. A balanced atmosphere where the historic past coexists in harmony with modern society. 2. The use of an integrated and holistic approach to the problem of conservation, cutting across all relevant disciplines and technologies. And 3, administration of heritage resources in a spirit of stewardship for the inspiration and benefit of the present and future generations. Next slide, please. The objectives of the National Cultural Heritage Act are to protect, preserve, conserve, and promote the nation's cultural heritage, its property and histories, and the ethnicity of local communities. Also, to establish and strengthen cultural institutions, and to protect cultural workers and ensure their professional development and well-being. Next slide, please. Furthermore, Republic Act number 10066 stipulates the principles, policies, and guidelines for cultural agencies, government institutions, and the citizens of the country in raising the levels of people's appreciation of our shared heritage, as well as to strengthen and advance the various interventions in safeguarding the nation's cultural wealth. Next slide, please. Here, cultural heritage refers to the totality of cultural property preserved and developed through time and passed on to posterity. Next slide, please. Cultural property refers to all products of human creativity by which a people and a nation reveal their identity. For example, including churches, mosques, and other places of religious worship, schools, and natural history specimens and sites, whether public or privately owned, movable or immovable, and tangible or intangible. Next slide, please. Tangible cultural property refers to cultural properties with historical, archival, anthropological, archaeological, artistic, and architectural value, and with exceptional or traditional production, whether of Philippine origin or not, including antiques and natural history specimens with significant value. Next slide, please. Intangible cultural property refers to the people's learned processes, along with the knowledge, skills, and creativity that inform and are developed by them, the products they create, and the resources, spaces, and other aspects of social and natural context necessary for their sustainability. Next slide, please. Intangible cultural heritage refers to the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, and skills, as well as the instruments, objects, and artifacts associated therewith, that communities, groups, and individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. These include 1. Oral traditions, languages, and expressions. 2. Performing arts. 3. Social practices, rituals, and festive events. And 4. Knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. And 5. Traditional craftsmanship. Next slide. Nationally significant refers to historical, aesthetic, scientific, technical, social, and or spiritual values that unify the nation by a deep sense of pride in their various yet common identities, cultural heritage, and national patrimony. Next slide, please. The so-called heritage zone refers to historical, anthropological, archaeological, artistic, geographical areas and settings that are culturally significant to the country, as declared by the National Museum and or the National Historical Institute of the Philippines. Next slide, please. Now, here are examples of the so-called World Heritage Site. UNESCO lists down the so-called World Heritage Sites. UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And so they have a listing of those World Heritage Sites as having outstanding universal value. In the Philippines, these include, for example, the Puerto Princesa Subterranean River National Park, the Tubataha Reefs National Park, the Mount Hamiguitan, which is protected, the rice terraces of the Cordillera, which is a living cultural landscape. And of course, we know the historic town of Vigan as a cultural site. And there are 4 Baroque churches in the Philippines that have been identified as World Heritage Sites. The Paway Church in Ilocos Norte, the Santa Maria Church in Ilocos Sur, the Miagao Church in Iloilo, and the San Agustin Church in Manila. Next slide, please. Now, what are the domains of cultural heritage? The so-called heritage domains. If I may read what is written underneath this oval, these are the so-called categorization of significant cultural properties according to their inherent nature and functions. So, starting with the blue one, well, we start with I would rather start with the gray one, the cultural significant natural resources, the one under. And then you have the green one, which says civic heritage and LGU programs, local government unit programs. We have is that orange, the intangible cultural heritage, then the yellow, the cultural institutions, the blue, which is prominent personalities, and the blue-gray, which is tangible cultural heritage. And we talk of this as important through the so-called cultural significance. Next slide, please. Now, let's start. Natural property of cultural significance comprise the unique land formations and water bodies situated in an outstanding ecosystem of the locality that includes the iconic flora and fauna, which are considered as having scientific and aesthetic importance. So kita na natin talagang connected ito dahil sa ating science part dito sa Future Earth Philippines. Next slide, please. As emphasized, the fundamental concern for the inventory of cultural properties is the statement of cultural significance. This is judged in 4 fields or criteria that are valuable for the past, present, and future generations. Likewise, it is implied that significance shall incorporate the content of a heritage item, the context, history, uses, and its social and spiritual prominence. Next slide, please. So in this next oval, we have the scientific, the right side, the social, spiritual, the aesthetic, and the historical. And the same boxes that or hexagons that you find are the same categorization that we have described earlier. So we have the culturally significant natural resources, the civic heritage and LGU programs, the intangible cultural heritage, the cultural institutions, the prominent personalities, and the tangible cultural heritage. Next slide, please. Now, it is very important in this work on cultural heritage to build and maintain a database. This is a consolidated local culture profile, which implies generating baseline data on local cultural statistics. Hence, local cultural mapping is essentially a process of building and maintaining the cultural resource database of a particular community. Next slide, please. The cultural database is essentially the bedrock of the participatory cultural mapping and profiling project. Databases allow us to collect, organize, store, and retrieve information in a consistent and useful manner. The experience we are going through now in our town of Bulacan, we have actually we have actually mobilized the public school teachers in the building and the creation and of course the maintenance of the database. So it is still an ongoing concern right now. Okay, ongoing pa yung process. Next slide, please. Now, the first step in generating data on cultural properties is to come up with an initial list of existing cultural properties, which are suggested by the key informants, as well as the various sources of information and other important reference materials. The list would be expanded as the mapping process builds up. Next slide, please. Now, what would be the objective-driven data fields? First, the background information on the cultural property, the description, its significance, its conservation status, and other significant data that shall describe or determine the item's provenance or rarity, and the intactness or integrity and representativeness, as well as references. Next slide, please. On the background information, for example, if we have a natural land formation, so the data fields are the name, common or local name, and other names that refer to the cultural property, photograph, a photographic image of the cultural property, the type and nature. So what is the nature of the cultural property? And the location, place where the cultural property is located, and or the area where the property has been found or sited. Next slide, please. Now, the description portion, okay, has the following data fields: the so-called subcategory, the description, the dimensions, and the ownership and jurisdiction. So, as far as the subcategory is concerned, UNESCO has identified for most of the categories and subcategories of significant cultural resources. This will be especially useful for assessing the value of the resource and in performing economic analysis. The description, of course, this descriptive text should expand on the category and subcategories fields, providing a basic explanation of what the resource is, its purpose and background, and other important features. Even the dimensions are important. So if you are talking of a cave, if you are talking of an island, or if you are talking of a rock formation, the dimensions are important because this presents the measures of the physical dimension of the cultural property in terms of size, area, weight, and other specifications. And of course, also the ownership or jurisdiction. Who claims ownership of the property? Is it public or private? Who has the jurisdiction in protecting the cultural property? The next data field is, the next slide shows the significance. Okay, so it is not only the description, okay, but or the dimensions, but the significance of this cultural property. Significance is an appraisal of the value or the levels of significance that could either be historical, aesthetic, scientific, social, and socioeconomic, among others, that are attributed to the cultural property by the members of the community. This must be substantially accounted for by the profiler. Now, we have also a data field on common usage, the unique and or multiple uses of the community. For example, yan ba ay for basic needs, for economic productivity, for socio-cultural or religious rituals, and or for other social events or functions. And then the people using the property, who and how many people are utilizing the cultural property, as well as the people who install conservation measures on the cultural property. The other data field would be other important data, other information related to the cultural property and its significance, and the stories associated, the narratives that support the significance of the property as affirmed by the members of the community, past, present, or future. The next slide would be on the conservation status, the condition of the cultural property, current condition, and what are the constraints in the conservation and the threats, problems or constraints that affect the cultural property and would pose a threat to its significance or hinder the delivery of its multiple functions. There are also, of course, there is a data field on protection measures, measures that have already been installed to maintain the good conditions or desired wellness of the cultural property. There are other issues under this, other problems that indirectly reduces the significance of the cultural property. Next slide, please. Now, we come to the assessment of significance. The assessment of significance and the statement that it produces are the basis for all good heritage decisions. It is a process that should be used as part of the management of all heritage items because it clarifies why the item is important. Next slide, please. The assessment of significance. Furthermore, significance assessment requires knowledge about the item, its provenance, context, and the comparative examples. It may be necessary to undertake research to establish enough knowledge to assess significance. Next slide, please. Now, in here is a chart or a diagram on the assessment of significance. So, at the center is how do we say that a cultural property is significant on the basis of provenance, on the basis of representativeness, rarity, or integrity. For example, here, who owned or made the cultural property, when, where, when, and how was it used? Is it documented, okay, under provenance? Then we have, is it a good example of its type or class? Does it represent a typical characteristic? So that will be the representativeness. And then, is it unusual or especially fine example of its type? Is it singular and unique? Does it have special qualities that distinguish it from others of its type of group? And that is the rarity aspect. And lastly, is it in good condition for its type? Is it intact or complete? Does it show evidence of the way it was used in repairs or adaptations? Is it still working and still in its original unrestored condition? That is the integrity part. Okay, next slide, please. Still on assessment of significance, on the historical significance, the questions, the inquiry questions are, is the object associated with a particular person, group, event, or activity? What does it tell us about a historic theme, process, or pattern of life? How does it contribute to our understanding of a period or place, activity, person, or group of events? Then significant scientific significance. Do researchers have an active or potential interest in studying this kind of object? How is it possible to predict future research today? What aspects make it of research interest? Can it be fairly certain that the item will reveal new research data if and when it is further investigated? Next slide, please. Still on assessment of significance, the aesthetic part. Is the object well designed, crafted, or made? Is it a good example of a style, design, artistic movement, or an artist or craftsperson's work? Is it original or innovative in its design? Is it beautiful by common standards, not personal views? Now, the social significance covers the socio-economic, the socio-political, and the spiritual. And the inquiry questions are, is the object of particular value to a cultural, ethnic, or other community today? How is this importance demonstrated? Has the museum consulted the relevant community about its importance to them? Can you cite instances as to how the heritage play a role in binding people together? How does the heritage contribute to the economic life of the community? Next slide, please. Now, I will just mention, as I said, we are still in the process. The proyektong Mapang Kalinangan ng Bulacan, and as I mentioned, I was assisted by Narwin Gonzalez of the UP Diliman History Department. And of course, he's also a member of our Kabesera Incorporated. We are called Kabesera because our town, Bulacan, was the former capital of the province of Bulacan. The capital was moved to Malolos during the establishment of the First Philippine Republic. Okay. So this is still ongoing. Next slide, please. So this is still ongoing, and so far they have only completed the intangible cultural property and heritage portion. Next slide, please. But in my desire to show examples of significant natural resources, this is because this is easily relatable to future Earth Philippines. The following examples are shown, which have been taken from the profile of significant cultural heritage of the municipality of Gasan, province of Marinduque. Okay, it is a public document, and I'm just giving them credit because the photographs I am showing are taken from this profile of significant cultural heritage that they have published or prepared. Okay, next slide, please. The examples of significant natural resources that I will show with pictures without the details, like where is it located, or what are the dimensions, or what is its conservation status. So I just want to show you the examples of these significant natural resources that can be categorized into land formations, bodies of water, plants, animals, the protected areas, and the environmentally critical areas. Next slide, please. Now, here is the location map of Gasan, Marinduque. Okay, so on the top portion, you can see Gasan. On the lower left, okay, actually, their adjacent towns are Boac and Buena Vista. Okay, next slide, please. Now, what are these significant natural resources that I would like to share with you? First, the land formation. So I just took one or two examples for each. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the rock or stone formation, the so-called Melchor Island Rock Formation in Gasan. Next slide, please. Now, another example would be caves, and this is these are the Talao caves. Okay, they call it the Una at Pangalawang Cueva. Okay, next slide, please. And then we have islands, and the example shown here is the Tres Reyes Island, part of the sun. Next slide, please. Now, this one deals with the significant natural resources, particularly bodies of water. Next slide, please. Here is an example, the Maapoy Creek. Okay. Next slide, please. A stream. And then, of course, waterfall. They have so many waterfalls, I just pick up one, and it is called Pitumpu Falls. I don't know yet what is the reason why it is called Pitumpu, which is of course 70. Next slide, please. Now, significant natural resources. Let's go to plants. Next slide, please. Here is something commonly known, the acacia tree or the rain tree. But here it is, okay, in all its beauty with the blooms that they have. Okay, next slide, please. Now, Uraro is a well-known product from Marinduque. In fact, we have assisted the Uraro industry here, the processing side, and here is how it looks. Okay, I did not show anymore the bottled aruro, which is baked, but it's one of the important economic activities that they have. Next slide, please. The seaweeds. I can see Professor Marco Nemesio Montaño among the audience, I'm sure he will be interested here. Dilato, which is again common to us, commonly known, but it may have a significant, an economic significance in this location. Next slide, please. Dimulabe or Dimulawin tree. Okay, we know that Dimulabe, we have learned when we were still in elementary, this is the national tree. Okay, next slide, please. The so-called red ginger fern or the nito. Next slide, please. The yantok and rattan plant, again, which has economic significance. Now, the significant natural resources, from plants we move to animals. The next slide will show us something very beautiful, a rare butterfly they call bila-bila. Of course, paru-paro in Tagalog. You know. Next slide, please. They have the purple crop, okay? And obviously, the color, okay, lalo na yung mga sipit, okay, looks purple. Next slide, please. And this is something that's common, but I think it's also very important to them economically, the rhombus squid or the pusit. Next slide, please. Now, we have an example here of a significant natural resource, which is a protected area. So next slide, please. This is the Barangay Banot Coral Reefs, which is a fish sanctuary. Okay, we know that these are very significant and important for the community. Next slide, please. They also have identified, and this is simply in the form of a map, the environmentally critical areas. And by environmentally critical, let us see what is shown in the next slide. This is the landslide hazard map of Gasan. Okay, so we have the portion which says prone to low landslide, moderate landslide, and high landslide. So this is important, okay, particularly now that we are talking of preparedness to natural disasters, safety, etc. Next slide, please. While cultural heritage can be seen in different categories, so we have natural resources, tangible, immovable heritage, tangible, movable heritage, and intangible cultural heritage, the examples shown in the foregoing presentation prioritize natural resources, as this can easily be related to the concerns of future Earth Philippines. Next slide, please. However, it is suggested that the other categories be incorporated also, or it might be incorporated already in the vision of future Earth Philippines, since the preservation of the significant ones is critically important to the lives of the future generations of people in those specific geographical locations. This is in terms of historical, physical, material, social, and cultural values, which will define and contribute to ways of living, which hopefully will lead to better and not to deteriorated quality of life. Now, that is the end of the PowerPoint, but I just would like to read to you some examples of the other types of cultural properties. So, for example, in the significant tangible, immovable heritage, most of them are government structures, but also there are privately built structures as well as commercial establishment. So the pictures I saw is a fortress which is owned by the diocese. And then of course the lighthouse, okay? An old bodega, an old public market, an American regime style bridge, the Gabaldon School building, of course the churches, both the Philippine Independent Church and the Catholic Church, the Catholic Cemetery, even the cockpit arena is a cultural property. The parks, okay, and the houses, which can be categorized, merong Spanish period, merong American period, merong Japanese period. Okay, I can mention that in front of our house there used to be an old glorieta. There were two, and the glorietas were the músicos, okay, competed during fiesta time. Okay, now they have built new glorietas. They destroyed the old ones, which were very beautiful. Now, in terms of the significant tangible, movable heritage, there are those that are actually found in the immovable heritage. For example, in the fortress, may mga kanyon doon, okay, na pwede mo naman paglipat-lipatin. And then, of course, archaeological objects like bones, skulls, fossils. And then, very common itong ceramics, earthenware, stoneware, porcelain, yung mga lamps, okay, the agricultural or the farming tools. There are wooden basins. Ano? I didn't know that there are wooden batya. No? Meron palang wooden batya noong araw. And of course, the different glass containers. Okay, some of you still remember the garapons that we find in our sari-sari store. Beautiful. And of course, yung mga ginagamit sa kusina. We still have a kamao where we store salt, or sometimes it's used for fermenting bagoong. Okay? And of course, di na nakakita kayo siguro nung plancha na di uling, you know? Di prinsa, okay? And of course, yung mga sewing machines, the tapayans, the old typewriters, the teapots, okay? Yung mga bayoneta, araw. These are, and of course, the other industrial commercial arts like furniture, coins, etc. There are also archival holdings like books, photographs, itong mga musical instruments, others, okay? And then, of course, the religious items, yung mga sculptures, yung mga bells, yung mga flags, yung mga paintings. These are a part of the cultural, significantly tangible, movable heritage. Now, there are also what we call significant intangible cultural heritage. The performing arts, the social practices, rituals, and festive events, the cuisine, the social practices, so itong ating pangkatkawayan, merong origins from those that are found in the old towns, the traditional games or sports, the traditional healing systems. These are so-called significant intangible cultural heritage. Bagay, ano rin yun, meron din connection sa science yun. And the healing rituals, okay? There are also significant personalities, yung mga bayani natin, and mga important personalities, as well as the significant cultural institution. So anyway, I am new to this, okay? But I thought I should share what I have learned when I assumed the chairmanship of the Heritage Society, and therefore I instinctively connected it to Future Earth Philippines. So ito lamang po. Maraming salamat. I'll be open to questions.
Maraming salamat na Dr. Dela Peña. Thank you so much. Naku, ang dami ko natutunan. May tongue twister yun, sir. Yung significant, tangible, immovable, blah, blah, blah. So, habang yung atin pong mga tagapakinig dyan, maaari po kayong maglagay at magsulat ng questions nyo sa Q&A box and sa chat box, right, Paul? And ayun, meron na sa Q&A. Eto, sir. Sabi, from Miss Annabel. Opo, from Miss Annabel Surara. Wow, Secretary Boy, love it po. Lahat ng sinabi nyo, ngayon ko lang narinig po. Sabi niya ganon. Dami kong natutunan. And then from Miss Horizon Chesser, from Happy Morning Show, what is your advice, Secretary Boy, to the LGU sa kanilang cultural heritage na napapabayaan na? And sino po ang dapat na magbigay ng pondo upang maiptaguyod po for Future Earth Philippines? Ayan.
Yes. Oo. Yan ay actually required ang lahat ng LGUs na mag-prepare ng cultural maps. Ano? Yung database. Kaya lang, hindi pa lahat gumagawa. No? Now, in our case, of course, meron kaming konting pondo, siyempre, kontribusyon ng mga miyembro. Meron din namang mga members of the community who appreciates the work and they contribute. And the LGUs, hindi nga lang malaki. No? And of course, yung mga teachers natin, alam mo, hanga ako sa kanila kahit na ika nga, hindi mo naman talaga sinuswelduhan to do that. Ano? But they really participate. No? Well, kung meron maibibigay na konting honorarium, okay lang. But really, it is the LGU's responsibility. And mabuti na mabuti kung merong heritage association to sa area. Kung wala, talagang LGU.
Like sir, siguro yung bago ko po tawagin yung susunod na magtatanong, yung significant, tangible, immovable is one example po yung mga bahay sa Batanes, di ba sir?
Yes.
So,
yes.
what do you think sir? Yung LGU po ba ng Batanes is also active in preserving their mga houses dun sa Batanes?
Ang tingin ko sa Batanes, bago pa magkaroon ng act, ay talagang natural na sa kanila na gusto nila i-preserve yung kanilang
Yes.
culture. Ano? In fact, meron nga silang sariling batas in the community. Hindi pwedeng bumili ng lupa doon kung hindi ka indigenous.
Na yun. Ang ganda. So talaga sir, parang you're saying na pag yung LGU talaga ay really keen on preserving their parang cultural heritage, yung local cultural heritage nila, ay magagawa talaga yung proper preservation, no? Yan. Thank you, sir.
Community
yes, the community, the participation of the community. So we have a question here from Mr. Cesar Gomez. Go ahead, sir.
Secretary Dela Peña, thank you very much for an interesting and challenging presentation. Just 2 points, just 2 points. One, from your talk, I get the feeling that cultural heritage need not be historical.
Okay? Yeah.
So I think the whole country will go through current and future cultural heritage in terms of the reforestation of our denuded mountains. So is that, can we say that that is a potential future cultural heritage?
Oo. Yeah, I think well, of course yung pag-include ng flora and fauna is already, I think, part of the explanation. But when you have a forest in an area, okay, I think that is actually a rarity. No, hindi lahat ng LGUs ay merong forest, and therefore the conservation is important.
Okay, the second thing, I noticed Dr. SDG is here, no? But hopefully with the cultural heritage, you can also highlight the local healing modalities.
Healing.
Healing, health, local healing modalities. Kasi parang second-class citizen yung ating mga local health practitioners. So
correct.
With Dr. SDG here and all that, and again, that's a future-oriented cultural healing.
Alam mo, Dr. Gomez, nung maliliit kami, madalas ako mapilayan. Hindi kami dinadala sa doktor pang pilay-pilay kung nadapa ka o doon sa manghihilot kami dinadala. No? Of course, nung ako'y kapag-asawa na, ang naging father-in-law ay konduktor, naiinis siya sa dadalhin yung bata sa manghihilot.
So I don't know, Dr. SDG is here at my,
But they have documented in the document of Gasan Marinduque, there is a long portion on healing practices.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Sige. Maraming salamat.
Dada si Sid.
Sir, yes, sir.
Totoo po yun, Cesar, no? Yung sa dokumentasyon. Pero ngayon po, of course, maraming napunduhan po ang DOST, mga state universities, yung tinatawag nating Traditional Knowledge Digital Library on Health. Pero ngayon po yung pinagkakabala natin yung dokumentasyon ng mga healing tradition ng mga community mismo.
Yes.
Halimbawa po sa mga dumagat remontado sa Tanay, sa Porac, Pampanga, at iba pa po. So para pong mas makabuluhan yung ganun yung sila mismo ang nagdodokumento ng kanilang healing traditions.
Doc, Sid, sa Sikihor ay tinutulungan din ng DOST yan. Oo.
Yes, so siguro po pwede kong sabihin, sa 2024 po, meron tayong pista ng gamutang Filipino. Nanghingi tayo ng pundo ang Siquijor State College sa PCHRD. At yan po ay gagawin sa Siquijor sa Lent season po, sa magmula Miyerkules Santo hanggang Sabado de Gloria.
Meron na
Ibibenta namin
po
kayo.
tayong mga kumpanya, local companies na talagang ginamitan na nila ng modern technology. Yung mga, alam natin, yung mga halaman na dati nilalaga at dinidikdik, ngayon makikita mo na available na sila na nakakapsula, nakabote. Of course, most of them are still categorized as food supplements, no? But siguro eventually, with more money coming from the government for grants, pwede na ring simulan yung mga clinical trials. Alam ko namang ginagawa na rin, may role din ng ating traditional, ano nga ba yun, medicine. Meron tayong ganung, Dr. Sid, ano nga tawag doon?
Yeah, yung PITAC, Philippine Institute
PITAC,
of Traditional and Alternative Healthcare. PITAC.
Yan.
Thank you po, Dada.
Thank you po, sir.
Thank you.
Kasi ba, Dr. Sig, kasama yung mga lumilipad?
Ano yung lumilipad, Sir Cesar? Hindi naman yan yung napuputol ang katawan, ano? Anyway, so ang dami na po nating questions, ano, from the Q&A. And also, i-remind ko lang po, baka kasi sabi nila, bakit daw naka-off yung chat box. The chat box is really meant for the panelists. And yung Q&A po ay meant for sa mga guests po na katulad nyo. There's one more question po from the chat box. Go ahead, Paul, bago tayo pumunta sa Q&A box.
Yes po, from Professor Benny Pacheco po. To Secretary Dela Peña, alam po kaya ninyo kung mayroon din katulad ng society sa kataping bayan ng Balagtas, like the Heritage Association Society po?
Okay. Yeah, I am aware. Pero hindi ako sure kung ano ang priority doon. Pero alam ko maano sila sa music doon.
Music,
Pero I'm not familiar kung ano yung mga activities yet kung consistent doon sa Heritage Act.
Balagtas, Bulacan po ba yun?
Ay, magkakatabi lang kami.
Oo. Baka
Magkakatabi lang
naman,
kami.
sir, ano yan, mga tula, kasi Balagtas Diyan
Pwede.
Balagtas,
Pero
diba?
alam ko, may mga musicians dyan.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Benny, for the question. Meron pong question from Mr. Ken Palkulan. Marami po na nawala ng mga heritage site dito sa amin sa Romblon, lalo na sa bayan ng Odyongan. For example, the site where the Odyong was located. Ito po ay ang lugar na kung saan naging kota bago po pa dumating ang mga inchik. Parang naging kuta bago dumating ang mga inchik. Di kasi makita ang tunay na location since napakahalaga ito, lalo na sa mga bagong henerasyon na di nakakaalam ng kasaysayan kung saan galing ang name ng bayan. What will I do? What will the LGU do to locate and reconstruct such a heritage site? Ayan, sir.
Tanong po natin kay Secretary Solidong, taga roon siya.
Dapat, sir, next time, pag mag-guest kayo, sabay kayong dalawa ni Secretary Solido mo. Okay, sige, tatanungin natin. Ayan, okay, sige po. Ito naman po, question from Andrew Ariola. Paul, go ahead.
Yes po, from Sir Andrew Ariola. Speaking of Batanes, can FEP member look into the concern of DNR directive on the propagation of 3 types of sweet potatoes instead of more than 10 varieties endemic? Thank you po. So,
Ano yung ginawa ng community? DNR ba yun? DNR?
yes po, may directive daw po on DNR on the propagation of 3 types of sweet potatoes instead of more than 10 varieties endemic.
DENR, hindi ang DA.
Yun na nga bakit DNR?
Hindi ko rin alam, pero alam namin sa DOST, meron kami tinutulungan dyan. Yung gumagawa ng local beer out of the sweet potato.
Talaga? Meron na
Kaya
ganun,
kung pupunta
sir?
kayo ng Batanes, they have a Batanes beer. Pero yung sa DNR, hindi ko alam kung bakit at kung ano yung possible explanation that para doon.
Yes.
Kasi alam ko yung sweet potato para kainin. So it's more of a DA concern.
Okay po. There's another question, sir, from Net25, from Miss Annabel Sorara. Ask ko lang po yung post office po na nasunog. Maiko-consider po bang isa sa mga cultural heritage? At may mga
Definitely.
tao din po pala at mga gamit na masasabi nating bahagi ng cultural heritage like the plansang diuling at yun pong mga bahay na ating mga IPs. Considered din po bang bahagi
Yes.
ng ating cultural
Yes,
heritage?
yes, yes.
Yes.
Ako po ay isa sa nalungkot talaga sa pagkasunog ng Central Post Office kasi
Oo
ang
nga.
ama po namin ay postmaster from 1931 to 1972. So, ang kinabuhay po namin ay sweldo mula sa Bureau of Post. No? Kaya
Kaya nga
lungkot na
po.
lungkot kami. At of course, cultural property, heritage property po yan.
So
at-
pwede pa ma-restore, sir, ano?
Actually, nakabasa na ako ng ng proposal. Of course, nung bago nasunog, hindi ba marami ng kinonvert na museum na dating mga opisina? Okay?
Opo.
Yung dating Agripina, Agri and
Mm.
Finance ay ginawa na ring museum, di ba?
Mhm.
Yung dating Congress ay ginawa na ring museum, and I think ang logical na susunod na gawing museum ay yung post office.
Mhm.
Kasi magkaka-age yan, American period. Ewan ko lang kung pwede pang i-restore yun after the fire.
Okay po. Thank you po. Yes, Paul, there's another question pa from the Q&A box.
Yes po, from Mr. John Nico Lazaro. Hi, thank you po for the insightful knowledge about cultural heritage. On my understanding, anything can be or classify as cultural heritage. Baka nililinaw lang po niya if ganun
Oo.
po yung classification.
Well, na-enumerate ko naman yun. Merong iba-iba. Merong natural resources, merong movable, merong immovable, merong ano tawag dito, yung mga
Twister
social,
nga, sir.
social, cultural practices, etc. So lahat, pati kung ano yung mga niluluto nila na unique doon sa lugar na yon, pati yung mga pinoproduce nila, kung sila ay nag-weave, kung sila ay gumagawa ng furniture, yun. Mukha sa Romblon, nabanggit mo yung Romblon, hindi ba? Yung mga marble products, it's part of the cultural heritage. Saka sa ating mga lugar sa halimbawa, yung maraming indigenous people, yung may mga indigenous people, yung weaving nila is a part of the cultural heritage.
Nako,
Okay.
sir, yung susunod po na nasa Q&A box natin
Sige.
talagang thank you po, sabi ni Miss Annabel Sorara. Sana makasama ako mamaya sa picture taking. I love you, DOST Secretary po. So much. Mapagmahal po siya sa media na tulad ko. Ayan. Meron ka talaga, sir, meron ka talagang fan dito. Yes. Go ahead, Paul.
From
Ay,
Professor
Annabel pa
Benny, okay po, from Miss Annabel Sorara po. Secboy, marami na po tayong vloggers, TikTokers. In the future, pwede rin po ba sila maging bahagi ng cultural heritage?
Ano yun? Yung mga
Mga vloggers po, mga social media content creator po.
Ayan.
siguro kung merong rarity or something significant, doon sa kanila sinasabi. Pero kung hindi ko ma-judge kung ano yung
At saka hindi
kung
natin
ano
alam
yung
pa
significant.
ngayon.
Oo.
Yes. Saan pa natin yun no, sir? Significant, relevant, immovable, movable.
Siguro at a certain time in the future, no?
Yeah,
Magiging
maybe.
part tayo ng cultural.
Dahil doon tayo papunta, sir, no? Yung mga vlog na yan, mga
Oo.
TikTok, social media, no? Talagang, so we never know kung saan tayo.
We never know.
Oo,
Pati yung mga equipment are actually part, yung mga lumang typewriter, mga lumang camera, this is part of the cultural heritage.
Sir, meron kaming lumang telepono, yung
Oo.
yung dial.
Marami sa amin ay part na kami ng cultural heritage.
Ayun nga. Medyo din ako, sir, nung nakita ko na, yung topic ni Dr. Dela Peña is cultural heritage. So, parang kakaiba, no? Yung talagang ni sir. So, mukhang wala na po tayong mga questions, pero alam mo, sir, ang dami po naming natutunan
Ewan ko
Sa,
baka si National Scientist Luli Cruz ay may gusto sabihin.
yan, Ma'am Luli, baka meron ka daw pong katanungan kay Dr. Dela Peña.
Ang dami kong natutunan ngayon kasi hindi ko alam yung mga diniscuss nyo, ano, tungkol sa cultural heritage. Palagay ko maraming mga scientists na tulad ko na kulang sa kaalaman tungkol dito sa nilecture nyo. At ito nga, dito natin makokonek yung sinasabi niya tungkol sa mga halamang gamot, at saka yung ating environment, yung ating mga forest, mga bundok, rock formation. Ito yung mga resources na talagang gusto nating ma-preserve for future generations. Andito lahat yan. Ito ang isa sa mga dapat alagaan natin, yung mga sumasali sa Future Earth Philippines.
Yes.
And may nakita ako ditong comment pala ni Benny Pacheco. Dito, Paul sa chat.
Yes po, from Professor Benny Pacheco po. I just realized now, how about encouraging the mapping of hazards and risk to overlay the mapping of cultural heritage?
The mappers. Oo, eventually, ganun nga. Sa ngayon ay database muna. But later on a national scale, pwede na magkaroon ng map.
Well,
It will come.
itong sabi niya is suggestion niya is how about mapping and how about encouraging the mapping of hazards and risk to overlay the mapping of cultural heritage.
Maganda nga itong example ng Gasan Marinduque kasi they included the hazard maps, no? Of course hindi pa sila overlaid to the location of the other properties.
Yes, Prof. Benny, go ahead.
I'll take this opportunity magsabi ng dalawang bagay. Secretary Boy, maganda kayong literally poster boy, na ang science ay may interest din sa kultura because kadalasan po may divide eh. Kaya ko rin naisip na yung idea ng mapping, lahat ngayon ay nag-geotag ng mga bagay-bagay at kung locational naman talaga. Kaya naisip ko, bakit hindi ang NCCA nga makisa ng DOST? Dahil yung mga interest ng tao sa isang lugar para balanse. Nakatingin ako sa beach para isipin na may storm surge doon, pero malay nyo, designated rin yun as cultural property for other reasons. Kaya naisip ko na sana with the advent of digitalization, yung mga mapping natin maging balanse. Like you did now. I was so excited nga na sa Secretary Boy, cultural heritage ang topic. Hindi ko alam na kayo na pala in charge dyan sa Bulacan. Kaya kudos sa inyo. Salamat po.
Kala ko, Prof. Benny, ikaw lang nagulat ako. Talaga nagulat ako. Hoy, cultural heritage si Dr. Dela Peña. Anyway, okay, isang hirit daw.
Pero tama si Prof. Benny. Halimbawa, yung mga turista, nakikita lang nila kung saan yung mga beach, kung saan yung mga caves, kung saan yung mga rivers. Pero actually, pwede mo ring overlay na rin. Ano yung mga musicians doon o kung ano man yung mga rare food that is found in the area, etc. Tama yun.
Sa Indonesia, may ganun sila, sir. So, kaya din natin yun. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Miss Annabel Surara, go ahead. Bago ko tawagin si Sir Cesar.
Opo, Sec Boy, one last na lang kasi di po ba nowadays po yung pong ating cellphone talagang lagi pong may mga bagong model. Nung nagsimula po ang cellphone, di po ba, 3210, yung talaga pong hindi makabago. Pero po ngayon, laging merong bago, di po ba? So, makakonsider po natin yung bagay na yun na maging bahagi po ng cultural heritage po and also po yung mga museum po kasi nowadays din po may mga bagong tatag na mga museum compared po dun sa mga una pong museum na talaga pong nire-renovate, pinapaganda po and bahagi din po ba sila ng cultural heritage po natin, Sec Boy?
I think so. Pati yung mga instrumento ng mga doktor noong araw.
Yun, thank you so much
Kasi
po.
eventually, yung mga gadgets na ginagamit natin ngayon ay ma-obsolete na. And of course, kailangan matandaan din natin kung ano yung mga naging importansya nila at a certain point in time.
So, makakasama yon Miss Annabel, yung mga cellphone na mas malaki pa yung charger kesa dun sa phone, diba? Naalala ko yun, sir, no? Yung pamukpok. Tapos naging parang pamukpok ng hold-upper na cellphone.
Yung mga lumang ballot box ay pwede na rin gawing cultural
Ay,
heritage.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, Miss Annabel Sorara. Yes, Sir Cesar.
Secretary, pahabol na lang pahabol. What can you say about the airport in Bulacan? How will it affect the cultural heritage in Bulacan?
Oh, well, actually, kaya nga kami nagtayo ng culture ng Heritage Society. We foresee that there will be very big changes in the way people live, ngayon pa lang, alam naman natin na basta merong isang progress, may both positive and may negative, no? Ngayon pa lang, alam mo, nangonti na yung hectareage na ginagamit sa farming at saka yung hectareage for aquaculture. So, yun may epekto na sa food supply. But on the other hand, we foresee that, right now, yung ongoing reclamation employs a lot of people, even if the contractor is a Dutch company, pero tagaroon din naman ang gumagawa. And we foresee na later on, gano'n. But ang aming projection kasi, even if the airport is already finished, operational, it has the best facilities, alam mo yung mga magtatrabaho naman dyan, cannot afford the living conditions in the modern airport. Doon pa rin titira sa lumang town. And ngayon pa lang, kami, well, this is another group naman, hindi naman ako member niyan, inibita lang ako dahil nga sa science and technology background. Pinoproblema na nila ang water supply para sa mga tao. Ngayon pa lang kulang na. Paano pa pag dumagsa ang tao? So, I don't know whether the airport owners or builders are attending to that.
Yes, thank you, Sir Cesar. There's another question. May nag-raise ng hand. Miss Vicky, Ma'am Vicky, go ahead. Yes,
Ay, hello. Ang dami ko pong natutunan, Dr. Boy Dela Peña. Kasi alam niyo ho, meron kaming MOA with National Commission of Indigenous People. At sa ngayon po, 10 na yung aming areas na pinasukan na may mga IPs. And talagang goal namin is magkaroon ng cultural mapping doon sa mga areas na nandun kami. Kaya lang, kailangan mo namin siguro ng guidance ng konti how best to approach this, no? And hindi ko alam kung merong sa inyong pwedeng mag-guide sa amin ng paano how best to address this cultural mapping documentation.
In our case, yung sinabi kong pangalan kanina na nandoon siya nagtatrabaho sa History Department ng UP Diliman, siya rin yung aming local historian, siya yung nag-o-oversee itong cultural mapping project namin sa Bulacan. So ginaguide niya talaga at saka nakita ko, iniisa-isa niyang kausapin yung mga teacher at ini-evaluate yung kanilang output. Ika nga may quality assurance.
Ayan.
Pero magagaling ang mga teachers.
Thank you, Miss Vicky. Ayan, si Mr. Sia, meron pa po siyang ano.
Yeah, oo, salamat, Dada. Yung para kay Ma'am Vicky, no? Marami akong kilala pagka gusto mo na sa National Commission on Culture and the Arts at sa mga pribadong mga grupo sila, mga interesado sa cultural mapping, pwede akong makatulong. Ano? So, bibigay ko yung aking, itatype ko may aking email address.
Yeah.
Pero bago ko umalis, gusto kong mabanggit, moving on, no, na mahalaga ito, kaya sana mayroong nagagawa para sa basic education, sa DepEd, at para sa atin sa pangkalahatan sa social media.
Yeah.
Paano mapaparating ang napakayamang cultural and natural heritage ng Pilipinas?
Actually, sa batas ay may definition ng role ng mga institutions, including the DepEd, including the National Archives, the National Library, even the Centro ng Wikang Pilipino has a role in it, and iba't iba pa. DILG definitely.
Ang maganda po na narinig ko yung mga oral traditions, pwedeng gawing, that's part of the cultural heritage, no? Tsaka yung mga healing traditions. At ang maganda po, meron po kaming pondo. Meron po kaming pondo to do this. So, ang kailangan namin ay guidance on how best to approach this assignment.
May offer na si Dr. Sia, and of course, yung sa aming gumawa ay pwede rin siguro tanungin. Pero itong output ng gasan, napakaganda. Ito yung kanilang publication, kumpleto. Napakaganda po ng contents. Hindi naman siguro nila ako kakasuhan na naglip ako ng pictures dito. No? Pero ang ganda ng ginawa nila.
Advertisement nga yan, sir.
Ang ganda po ng ginawa nila.
Okay. Thank you po, Sir Sid. Marami pong salamat, Ma'am Vicky. Nako, meron ditong thank you so much, Sec Boy, from Miss Horizon. Message to all kababayan na hindi nagpapahalaga sa ating cultural heritage. Nako, pahalagahan na natin. And sana po, malampasan mo daw yung operation mo, sir. So, maraming salamat.
Oo.
Okay. Ayan, nako. Paano ba yan, sir? Kulang na naman ng oras. Dapat may part 2. At yung part 2, sir, baka tama, dapat tandem na kayo talaga ni Secretary Solidum, no? Kasi merong question na meant for the two of you. Merong question na siya lang at ikaw ang sasagot. So, nako, ang dami namin talagang natutunan. Pero nagre-request dito si Miss Annabel. So, siguro kailangan mag-photo op tayo. Paki-on nyo yung camera nyo at mag-group photo tayo. Kukuha, Josh, ikaw ang kukuha ng picture. Ayan. Everybody, mag-picture taking daw tayo. Ayan. Paki-open.
Ayan po, while waiting po na ma-open yung mga camera, reminder lang po sa participants, nasa chat box na po natin ang link for the evaluation form and for your e-certificates. Pati po yung mga links. Salamat po.
Okay, sige. Mag-picture na tayo. Baka yung iba, hindi pa sila naka-copier kaya hindi na ma-open ang camera nila. Okay?
Photoshop na lang daw, Photoshop.
Am I going to count, Josh? Okay. Sige. 1, 2, 3, say science.
Science.
Okay, thank you. Nako, Sir, Dr. Dela Peña. And naku, ang dami po namin natutunan and hopefully po pagbibigyan mo kami sa susunod na pagkakataon because I'm sure, sir, ang susunod siguro update, ano na yung nangyari. Baka may mga bago na mga cultural at meron pang bagong tongue twister na significant, significant immovable. Pero sana po mag-prosper po talaga itong initiative na ito at kasi medyo nauunahan tayo ang Indonesia kahit ang ganda ng kanilang pagpe-preserve ng kanilang mga cultural heritage kayang-kaya natin 'yon, 'di ba, sir? Now that you are there.
Nakita ko si Dr. Tabios, kasama dito yung mga body supporter, etc. I'm sure you'll be interested.
Yes, oo. So maraming salamat, Dr. Dela Peña, and hopefully you'll be able to join us again sa susunod. And ang dami po naming natutunan at in behalf of all our scientists na nandito and academicians at lahat po ng mga guests natin sa Facebook Live, dito sa Zoom, marami pong salamat sa inyo. And thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon and hope to see you again next Friday. Another exciting, di ba, Paul? Another exciting topic.
Yes po. Next Friday po, same time, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. SDG Action Hour.
Yes. Dami nating national scientists na nag-attend, pati si DR na dyan.
Maraming salamat, sir.
Thank you.